In 2013, a Seattle megachurch called Mars Hill drew over 12,000 people each week across 15 campuses in 5 states, an empire built seemingly overnight. But 1 year later, it collapsed. By January 1st, 2015, Mars Hill Church no longer existed. How does something rise that fast and yet fall that hard? What went wrong and what can we learn? I'm Bo Shevasu, a missionary videographer who started my own ministry back in 2010. I have produced thousands of films for churches and missionaries and ministries all around the world. This gives me almost an unfair advantage because I get to see what actually works and what quietly breaks ministries. The goal of this series isn't finger wagging, it's to study the rise and the fall of Christian pop culture movements so that we don't replicate their mistakes. And so the ministries that you and I both care about, those can thrive with integrity and longevity. I live just down the road from Seattle. I remember when Mars Hill was the talk of the town. I visited once to see what the buzz was all about, and I was honestly impressed by much of what they had built. And maybe that's why the collapse hit so hard and why these lessons matter. The church began humbly in 1996 in Mark and Grace Driscoll's living room. Seattle was, quote, the least churched city in the U.S., and I believe it. Mars Hill aimed squarely at skeptical young adults. Early attendance bobbed around, but by 1999, they were 350 strong. Not bad. And Driscoll came on full time. In 2003, they moved into a massive Ballard warehouse. The formula clicked. Informal vibe, bold preaching, heavy use of media. And between 2006 2009, to relieve overcrowding, Mars Hill launched video campuses. The model worked. At peak, they reached 15 locations in 5 states and racked up online sermon views in the hundreds of thousands every week. By 2012, Outreach magazine, they listed Mars Hill among the nation's fastest growing churches. Driscoll became a celebrity pastor and co-founded the Acts 29 church planting network. From living room to national influence in under 2 decades. It was stunning. But the seeds of the fall grew alongside this success. In 2007, a bylaw overhaul centralized all their authority into a small executive circle, and it weakened broader elder oversight. And 2 pastors specifically who resisted, they were fired and publicly shunned. Well, that signaled a culture where dissent equaled disloyalty. Church discipline, which is biblical, came across very heavy-handed. One leaked 2012 case made national rounds, and it painted a very punitive picture. Charisma carried the brand, but accountability lagged behind. By late 2013, cracks went public. I remember radio host Janet Meffred, I think that's how it's pronounced. She once confronted Driscoll on the air publicly over unattributed material in a call to resurgence. He later apologized for his mistakes, he called them, but this scrutiny widened. You may even recall in early 2014, documents showed that church funds, over $200,000, they were used for a bestseller campaign to get the Real Marriage book onto the New York Times list. Well, many members, rightfully so, felt deceived. Then the Global Fund controversy, where donors thought gifts fueled overseas missions, which is very near and dear to my heart. But they found out only a small fraction reportedly actually went abroad, while much was used domestically. So consequently, trust eroded. Former leaders spoke out. A group including the co-founder, Leif Moy, he published a public confessions. It was about harmful internal culture, success regardless of human cost, if you know what I mean. And then Counselor Paul Tripp, he once called it the most abusive, coercive ministry culture ever that he'd ever encountered. That's saying a lot. So meanwhile, old pseudonyms, forums, posts with crude language, those resurfaced, and thus those amplified these concerns about temperament and tone. Well, attendance and giving dropped, and so layoffs followed. The momentum was reversed. Summer of 2014 was the breaking point. Protesters picketed the Bellevue campus, and on August 8th, Acts 29 removed Mars Hill and Driscoll, and urging him to step down and seek restoration. On August 24th, he took a 6-week leave while elders investigated. Their late September conclusion was this: it was a pattern of bullying and domineering leadership, sinful and harmful, though not necessarily any charges of immorality or theft or even heresy. They proposed a restoration plan with accountability. Instead, on October 14th, 2014, Mark Driscoll, he just resigned. So without its central figure, Mars Hill unraveled. On October 31st, leaders announced dissolution by year end. Campuses would either close or become independent. And on January 1st, 2015, that's exactly what happened. The organization ceased to exist. So what do we take away? Well, first, no leader is above accountability. Centralizing power around one personality, it creates these blind spots and eventually blows up because we are sinners. So healthy boards must be independent, and they must be informed, and they must be empowered to say no, even to a central, gregarious, very charismatic leader. Second, integrity over image. Gaming a bestseller list or blurring donor intent can produce short-term wins, but eventually leads to long-term collapse. Transparency is cheaper than a scandal. Third, culture beats strategy. If people inside feel controlled, afraid, or expendable, the results outside are on borrowed time. Care for souls before counting seats. Fourth, mission over man. When a church's brand is inseparable from one voice, the institution can't survive a leadership failure. Share the pulpit, grow multiple leaders, and keep the focus on Christ and the community, not one centralized personality. Fifth, success demands humility. Rapid growth isn't proof of health per se. I mean, it's good, but the faster you scale, the more you need slowness in confession, correction, and character work. For those who were part of Mars Hill, the loss was personal. Friendships were scattered and shattered, staff displaced, trust was shaken. People did meet Jesus there. Their marriages were helped, lives were changed. Don't get me wrong, but the failures of leaders don't void the faith they preached, if that makes sense. The Christian story itself, it confronts the very sins that toppled Mars Hill, such as pride, manipulation, and my biggest pet peeve, hypocrisy. And these point us to a Savior who never fails. Vision and charisma can start a movement. Only character and accountability can sustain it. Churches can fail, leaders will fail, but the hope of the gospel, it doesn't. It stands when our empires don't.